thank you for coming for the last day of the international conference In From the Margins, sharing footnotes of subaltern knowledge and practices, questioning North-South relations and ethics of international collaboration. My name is Biljana Đorđević. I'm an assistant professor at the Faculty of Political Science, University of Belgrade. I guess I'm here because, among other things, I teach contemporary political theory, but also culture of human rights. And I also spoke before with our keynote speaker, Basma el Husseiny, a little bit about that, and I'm very looking forward to hearing her keynote address this morning. The title of it is Human Rights-Based Approach Through Artistic and Cultural Practices. But before I give floor to Basma, I just want briefly to read you her biography. So Basma el Husseiny is a cultural manager, an activist for social change, and a cultural rights defender. For the past 30 years, she has been involved in supporting independent cultural projects and organizations in the Arab region and sub-Saharan Africa, bringing together her passion for civil society and community welfare with her expertise. The two main organizations that she founded and led, Al-Mawred Al-Thaqafi, the Culture of Resource in English, and Action for Hope, are proof of her commitment to culture and artistic creation as tools that enable people's empowerment and socio-economic improvement and allow a social change in the medium and long term. The first non-governmental regional cultural organization in the Arab region, Al-Mawred Al-Thaqafi, and as understood, the director is here. Hello. Pioneered remarkable projects. For instance, the first cultural management training program in Arabic and the first cultural policy research and development program in the Arab region. While the Action for Hope, that Basma currently leads, protects and promotes the cultural rights of marginalized communities and the countries undergoing or emerging from conflict. Action for Hope pioneered cultural relief programs, new alternative models in art education, and production for refugee and marginalized communities, and is leading the Landscapes of Hope global civil society network, promoting the role of arts and culture in social change. In 2018, Basma won the UCLG Agenda 21 for Culture International Award for her contribution to the relationship between culture and sustainable development. Basma, you'll have some 30 to 45 minutes for your speech, and then I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Biljana. Thank you. This is very generous. This is a historical day for me because this is the longest ever speech that I've ever given to my life. And this is why I had to write it down. I usually just stand and improvise, but improvising for half an hour is a bit risky. I'm not that trained. So please bear with me. If you are very bored, think of the questions that you need to ask to attack me at the end. And if you fall asleep, if you didn't have enough coffee, just do this. Then I will notice and change the tone of my voice a little bit. I do this all the time, so sorry about that. First, thank you, the University of the Arts, the colleagues here, and especially, of course, my very good friend and mentor, Milena Dragicevic. I hope I pronounced correctly this time. Yeah. Who actually has been helping the work of arts and culture activists in the Arab region since the first time we met in 2005, so a long time ago. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be here with you and to share with you some of these questions, some of these kind of issues. My talk is about the relationship between human rights and culture, broadly. And also trying to understand what it means when we say a human rights-based approach to culture, because this is a term that's now commonly used in many contexts. So I'll try to unpack some of the problems that exist around the human rights-based approach in cultural work, with the understanding that cultural work is the vital field of artistic creativity. My aim is also to stimulate discussion that would make this relationship between human rights and culture more effective in terms of protecting human rights, as well as in terms of enhancing artistic creativity and cultural work. Allow me to start by trying to define where we stand now and here. And if you don't agree, please save your disagreement to the end so we can have a good discussion. I think that we all agree that there are serious and continuous violations of international human rights principles everywhere, not just in global South countries where brutal dictatorship is the norm of governance, but also in the democratic global North that legalizes the killing of thousands of civilian immigrants by drowning in the sea every year. And if I don't want to be so dramatic, also by legalizing depriving thousands of artists and culture workers of their basic right of mobility and thus affecting their basic right to decent and fair work. I think that we might also agree that freedom of expression is restricted, not only in conservative Islamic countries in the global South, where many taboos are imposed on artistic freedom, but also in the open and tolerant societies in the global North, where it is very difficult for an artist to tackle some topics that are regarded to be challenging to dominant values in the North, and where racist artistic practices limit the scope of those coming from the South to certain topics, roles, and audiences. If we agree with this very brief and generalized description of where we stand, then we agree that our challenges are global, full stop, not global North or global South. If you have doubts about this, please allow me to remind you of three peculiar political incidents that happened in the global North in recent years and that were previously perceived as impossible to happen in the North while they are common in the global South. First, there is the storming of the White House by Trump supporters. We all remember the very peculiar and grotesque images, right? Then there is the attempted military coup in Germany, of all countries. Military coup in Germany. You don't add up. And then more recently, a few days ago, of course, the mutiny of the Wagner militia in Russia. I would also like to draw your attention, in particular in the field of arts and culture, to what happened in Documenta 15 in Kassel in Germany last year. And it's the disputes over artistic content that led to confiscating artistic works that were accused of being anti-Semitic and the resignation of the curators, the Indonesian group, the Indonesian collective, One Grupa. These incidents are, of course, totally disconnected and perhaps do not stand in court as evidence on similarities between the North and the South. But I think it is important to consider them as potential indicators that things are not what they seem in the North. I'm not asking you here to ignore the huge disparities that divide the world, but rather to regard these disparities as common challenges that those working in the two fields of human rights and culture everywhere should address, preferably in a coordinated way. The first task at hand is for them, us, those working in culture and human rights. The first task at hand is to look at some of the common conceptions, or rather misconceptions, of the relationship between culture and human rights, and to question the so-called human rights-based approach to culture work. Many of those working in human rights understand this approach, the human rights-based approach, as simply an endeavor to make artistic work more of a conduit for disseminating human rights principles within society. This understanding focuses on the content of the artistic work, or rather the message that such a work attempts to convey. In some cases, this understanding extends to the relationships of production of some artistic works in terms of their respect for human rights. For example, the now common or popular colorblind casting. This is, I think, an example of how production relationships are affected by human rights principles. According to this understanding, the work of art functions as a bridge between clear, constant, and universal principles of human rights on one side and society on the other side. However, many artists and cultural workers look at this understanding with great skepticism for various reasons. One of these reasons is that they consider the content of a work of art as an important part of artistic creativity. It's at the essence of a work of art. And therefore, it is the territory of the artist. For them, using the work of art to spread the principles of human rights would weaken the agency of the artist on his or her work and would eventually lead to damaging the status of artists and their control over their creative fields. Another reason for not believing in this understanding of the human rights-based approach is that artists believe that artistic creativity is a dynamic process that's full of fluidity and surprise. It's not a static process, and it's not also a structured process in many cases. And therefore, binding this process to fixed universal principles of human rights could lead to stagnation and shallowness, even if the artist believes in these principles. Despite this, there are, of course, some successful examples of cultural experiences that played an important role in disseminating universal human rights principles with reasonably good artistic standards. However, one must admit that these few good experiences, and I can name a few from our region, there are many examples from Palestine in particular, but also from Egypt and Syria, of plays or theater groups or films that try to express human rights principles and maintain a good artistic level. However, these examples cannot hide the hundreds of poor quality artistic works that sought to enhance, for example, the role of women, fight racism, or advocate religious tolerance, etc. And that, in fact, due to their artistic shallowness, failed in increasing the respect for human rights among their societies. It is important to note that this understanding is promoted in particular by funding organizations from the global north that provide a large part of the funding for the arts in global south. So you see how this perception is coming from the global north and kind of imposed on global south countries. On the other hand, artists and cultural workers interpret the human rights-based approach as a means to defending their right for free artistic expression. For them, human rights means that they express themselves freely without restrictions, and also protecting them from political and social oppression, similar to the way journalists and media practitioners are defended. However, it is important to take note of the fact that artistic freedom is not given the same priority by human rights organizations as freedom of the press. And therefore, persecuted artists are less entitled to defense than journalists are. It is possible that some of this neglect is caused by a lack of appreciation of the social impact of cultural work, something that repressive regimes are very aware of. So it is kind of somehow puzzling to see that those who defend human rights are negligent of the social impact of cultural work, and the oppressors are well aware of this value, of this impact. The most substantial problem embedded in this dichotomy is the fixation on the universal principles of human rights as a recommended basis for artistic content. I believe that any positive relationship between cultural work and the field of human rights must go far beyond established principles and written texts. It must explore and question the human need for justice, which is the basis, the foundation of human rights values, of human rights principles. From this perspective, the relationship between culture and human rights becomes a dynamic relationship based on questioning and imagination and not on advocacy and endorsement. In my opinion, a work of art that is most successful in promoting human rights is one that questions the axiom of these rights and their meaning to the individual and society. Because by doing so, it would also explore the impact of the violation of these rights in the past, present, and future, and thus contributes to giving life to texts that are preserved in United Nations conferences. I believe that a work of art is not required to advocate human rights by reproducing them through artistic tools, but rather to give them renewed validity through questioning. The second problem is the relationship between culture and human rights. In the relationship between culture and human rights lies in the prevailing tendency in the field of human rights itself to give priority to individual rights over collective rights, and to political and civil rights over social and economic rights. Some may disagree with me on this and say that economic and social rights are also covered by international human rights laws, and this is true. But it cannot be denied that the liberal concepts that emphasize individual freedoms have a clear supremacy in the agendas of human rights organizations worldwide. On the positive side, this supremacy gives importance to the role of the individual artist and helps protect his or her rights in free artistic expression, as is evident now in the agendas of international human rights organizations that have recently focused on artistic freedom and the protection of artists. And some here might have attended the IFAFA conference in Stockholm in early May, and the whole conference was focused on artistic freedom. And then there was another conference in Norway, it's actually the World Freedom of Expression Forum, and they had this also partial focus on artistic freedom. So apparently this trend, which started maybe a year ago, is on the rise. However, in the literature by the major international organizations that advocate artistic freedom, one hardly finds any reference to the social context where this freedom would be exercised, let alone any mention of collective rights such as access to culture. It appears as if artistic freedom stands alone with an intrinsic value that surpasses social conditions. I think this is very much a global north perspective, where access to culture is not a major concern. And the connection between access to culture and artistic freedom is less clear. In global south countries, the lack of access to culture lies at the root of the society's failure to respect artistic freedom and protect artists. In my opinion, separating artistic freedom from its social, economic, and sometimes even political context would inevitably lead to exposing artists to more danger. Why? Because they become alienated from their society and thus denied the possibility of solidarity and protection within their communities. In the current setup of international human rights systems, we can say that artistic freedom and the protection of artists have become situated within the international system of civil and political rights, and not within the framework of social and economic rights. This results in a significant lack of interest in collective cultural rights on the part of international organizations that's manifested in the scarcity of literature on the subject, as well as in the administrative structures and funding programs that support collective cultural rights. To better understand the importance of recognizing the collective nature of cultural rights, it is important to remember that during the past 4 decades, the world witnessed more than 30 wars in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So this is 30 over 4 decades. So kind of an average of, 9 per decade. These wars resulted in the displacement of more than 90 million people, the destruction of the infrastructure of more than 20 countries, and the imposition of economic sanctions on 14 countries, resulting in the impoverishment of tens, if not hundreds of millions. Add to this the implementation of economic policies designed by the World Bank and other mega economic drivers that increased extreme poverty, and this is even in World Bank statistics. Extreme poverty increased by 1.1% over the past 2 years. So, increased extreme poverty and widened the gap between the rich and the poor in many countries in the global south. The overall impact of war and liberal economic policies that has not just been the loss of lives and livelihoods, but also the loss of the historical and contemporary cultural assets of vast communities and the inability of hundreds of millions to access basic cultural services. In most global south countries today, one could estimate that more than 1/3 of their populations do not have the opportunity during their lifetimes to attend a live theater performance, a music concert in a concert hall, or an exhibition of visual arts. In many cases, they also cannot afford the access to their own natural and cultural heritage. In addition to this, most forcibly displaced people are alienated from their original language and not allowed to practice their cultural traditions and are forced to submit to social integration policies that erase their cultural identities and thus negatively affect their ability to create art. The third problem related to the human rights-based approach to cultural work is the relationship between the UN institutions that are responsible for the protection of human rights on one side and the UN cultural institutions on the other side. There are significant differences between the work modalities of the two types of institutions. The international tools and the institutions concerned with human rights, such as the UN Council for Human Rights in Geneva, for example, appear to be more effective and influential because they rely on quantitative measurement of the implementation of human rights principles. You have these indexes in every human rights field. And they link the protection of human rights with the political and economic privileges that are given to states. You know, every 4 years there is this ritual of presenting reports in Geneva to the UN Council of Human Rights, and then the countries have to face especially global south countries, have to face all these numbers and figures of people arrested, people tortured, people killed, etc. And then this is linked also to trade agreements, even to banking privileges, banking facilitations, etc. On the other hand, the international institutions watching over culture, such as UNESCO, are politically softer and depend on narratives and tools of international cooperation in the monitoring and implementation of the relevant conventions. There is no stick, it's only carrots most of the time. Sometimes not even carrots, it's just the persuasion of carrots. This is the kind of the cultural, the UNESCO side thing. Sorry if anybody from UNESCO is here. I'm kind of vaguely affiliated to UNESCO, but the impact of this difference between the two types of institutions has become more visible recently with the increasing use of the term cultural rights. Since there is no documented description of the position of these rights in the international human rights system, not even of the areas covered by these rights, despite, of course, the important contributions provided by the Freiburg Declaration, an old document now, and the efforts made by Farida Shahid, the first UN Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights. Still, we operate, those who are operating in cultural rights, without any kind of clear documents that positions cultural rights in the international human rights system, and no kind of definition of what they mean, what they cover. There are many attempts, but nothing officially recognized. Therefore, it's not clear how to measure the violation of these rights, nor the mechanisms for defending them, and whether this is a responsibility of international organizations working in human rights or international organizations working in culture. So cultural rights fall in the darkness of the many cracks that exist between UNESCO conventions and international human rights laws, and especially in the large gaps between the work of civil society organizations working in the field of culture and those concerned with human rights. This brings me to talk about Action for, the organization that I am currently leading, because basically part of our work, a great part of our work, is trying to address some of these gaps, or at least find ways to address these gaps. We tried in Action for Hope. Action for Hope was established in 2015 with the premise to address the cultural needs of marginalized communities and to advocate for cultural rights. This is just a very brief description. So we tried to address the three problems that I described before. One, the fixation on human rights principles as the basis for artistic content, and to sacrifice artistic quality in this way, if this is a choice. The second problem is the perception of artistic freedom as an individual right rather than a collective right. And the third problem or third question is around the ambiguity of who takes care of cultural rights, who is in charge of cultural rights. For example, labor rights, we all know who takes care of labor rights. There's an organization called ILO. Everybody knows it. Cultural rights are kind of everywhere and nowhere. Now, the most difficult question, and this we encountered at the very beginning of our work back in 2015, was about maintaining a good balance, and good is not very good. Good balance between upholding human rights values and the artistic quality of the work we support. And I say good, not very good, because it's continuous work. The starting point of our work was to provide artistically talented youth and children from marginalized and refugee communities with the training and production opportunities that they need to become professional artists. But almost all of them did not receive any prior education in the arts, not even a weekly class at school in the arts. This does not exist. And some of them did not receive any kind of education at all in the arts, or just general education. Consequently, their artistic taste was limited to what they receive in the media. To address this weakness, we encouraged them to search for artistic references in their own cultural heritage that could possibly inspire them and empower their creativity. We did our best to provide them with the technical tools and types of knowledge that they need for creating arts. We also focused on introducing them to contemporary artistic experiences and connecting them to the central cultural scene in the countries they live in. Most of them were refugees, although not all of them are refugees, and they live outside the cities or in the cities but in closed ghettos. There is no interaction at all possible between them and the cultural scene. This just not happen at all. I think this is also the case in many parts of Europe. And finally, we encourage them to apply critical thinking to everything that we provide them with, and everything around them in general, because critical thinking, we believe that it's a very important tool for survival, especially if you have a difficult life ahead of you. The second question, and perhaps the most important one, was about the relationship between our work and the communities that we work with. Most of these communities are socially conservative and are very skeptical towards anything that deviates from the norm and the tradition, especially if it includes a departure from known social roles of women and the relationship with men. We had to earn the trust of certain segments of these communities who could influence others. And we had to do this with honesty, seriousness, and all the time. It's continuous work. This is not easy at all. And the difficulties continue until now. And we succeeded in forming critical masses that are supportive of arts and culture within these communities, especially among women and youth. But of course, every now and then we encounter a problem of somebody or a family or a group of families saying this is all not allowed, it's against our traditions, against our religious beliefs, and then we have to enter into negotiation again. This is a nice photo, but...
Yeah, so you could just please savor.
Okay. Whose presentation is this? Maybe I can use it. Actually, yesterday I prepared a presentation that had all images of war, destruction, refugees, and statistics and stuff. And then I looked, this is too depressing, too gloomy, and I decided not to use it.
Sorry.
So this is better, thank you. Let's keep this. So always we encounter these kind of, I wouldn't call them objections, I would call them expressions of insecurity from communities that we work with, and we deal with them always on the negotiation tables, let's say. So, our adoption of cultural rights as collective rights was key in our work. We did our best not to support an individual artist or a work of art in isolation from the cultural rights of the community from which they come, or to whom the work of art is presented. Some may ask, what if a community rejected a particular artist and persecuted and abused him or her? Of course, this is very possible, but the solution we propose is not to isolate the artist from the community, but rather to facilitate and manage negotiations between him or her and the community, while providing temporary protection if necessary. And we had many cases like this. Because at the end of the day, we dream of a day when marginalized people would defend the artistic freedom and not view it as a threat to the value system that they embrace. The third and final question we faced, although we did not really pay attention to it until 4 years ago, is how we can protect cultural rights from an institutional and structural point of view, not just through the work we present or that we do with communities, but as an organization. Firstly, we realized that this is something that we cannot do alone. As a small organization that specializes in arts and culture, a field that's regarded to be always on the periphery of important fields. So our ability to really impact the discourse on cultural rights is limited by this position and by our size. Rather, this would require a collaboration, a broad collaboration among several organizations working in various fields, because cultural rights affect and are affected by many other rights, individual and collective. Somebody showed me yesterday, I think it was Elena, a report that an organization in Lebanon submitted to the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing. Some would say, what's this to do with culture? What is it to do with cultural rights? It is right in the heart of cultural rights because, of course, in many countries, the solution to the acute crisis in providing housing, and I don't know if this is a problem here, but it's a problem in most global South countries, is to build these new settlements or compounds or complexes that would be rows and rows of kind of cement buildings, no theaters, no concert halls, no art schools or art training facilities, nothing, and no open air spaces that are equipped to present art to the community, and no tools for people from this community to create art if they are talented and if they want to. And this, so the right to housing is very important when we talk about cultural rights. Just to give a passing example. We also realized that the challenges standing in the way of protecting cultural rights are global in nature. I mentioned war, and poverty. These are the most long-standing ones. And the impact of climate change is a very pertinent one. So we need to learn and share experiences with peers from different parts of the world. So as this tiny organization that has 16 people working and has an office in Beirut and a small office in Amman, what do? We went very ambitious. We created a platform, a network, for collaboration and solidarity among organizations working in various fields that are aware of the importance of cultural rights. This is how our initiative, Landscapes of Hope, and Belena mentioned it at the beginning, started in 2019 as an exploratory process providing tools for cooperation and solidarity among those seeking social justice and attempting to address the impacts of war, poverty, and climate change while enhancing and supporting the role of culture in this endeavor. So it's an unlikely combination. It's not just anybody who's, any organization that is working to alleviate poverty through small credit, for example. No, they should be also aware of the connection between their work and cultural rights. The network now consists of 25 civil society organizations from Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Arab region, and even a couple of organizations from Europe, and many organizations from Latin America, as I mentioned. And they work in fields such as gender equality, digital empowerment, environmental rights, freedom of expression, of course, and also in arts and culture. We are aware of the importance, also aware of the importance of dialogue between civil society organizations like us and others in our network, and many organizations may be present here. The dialogue between these civil society organizations from one side and United Nations organizations that lead the fields of human rights and culture on the other side. And we hope that this dialogue would help bridge existing gaps and find ways of joint action towards protecting cultural rights. We also hope that such dialogue would bring about a clearer understanding of cultural rights and a more prominent position of these rights in international agendas. For us, the human rights-based approach to cultural work means a commitment to advocating and protecting cultural rights as part and parcel of humanity's quest for justice. For us, justice means that every human being should have the right to enjoy theater, music, poetry, sculpture, film, dance, etc., and should have an equal opportunity to create art. This is very important. And even if these people are living in a refugee camp or a slum area. Yeah, no, I haven't lost it. We also understand that this kind of belief in justice and this understanding of justice implies a responsibility to address the reasons why people end up living in slums or refugee camps. Finally, with modesty, we recognize that our work is a small drop in the ocean and that the value of our work is confirmed only through continuous questioning and through dialogue with people who ask similar questions. After all, questioning is the first function of creativity. Thank you.